Oh, good morning, ladies.
Good morning.
My name is Deb. I'm a real alcoholic.
Hi, Deb.
Oh, my goodness, there's a lot of you out there this morning. It is an honor and a privilege when I'm asked to do anything for the program of Alcoholics Anonymous. It really is. I had to stop a couple of years ago and think about what I was actually saying when I said that out loud. Right? Because there are a lot of things that, I've just been saying for years, and it just makes sense. And it's, there was a part of me that felt like it was accurate. And I think about the words honor and privilege. And I mean them both. Right? The program of Alcoholics Anonymous is the reason why I have a life worth living today. The program of Alcoholics Anonymous dropped me into your arms so that you could deliver me into the arms of God. And there is no greater gift than being delivered into the arms of God. And that is the work that we do here, ladies. That is the work that we do. When I got to Alcoholics Anonymous, I was 15 years old. I was desperately alcoholic. I was a daily drinker. I was unable to keep food down. I was an absolute wreck. I went through a treatment center that didn't think that adolescents were real alcoholics, and so they didn't put me through a medical detox. And I came to you, not because I wanted to, but because the trouble was going to keep coming if I didn't. And you went to the mat for me, day in, day out, one car ride at a time. And you delivered me into the arms of God by putting me onto the program of Alcoholics Anonymous as it's outlined in our literature. Guys, I was not given a lot of other rules to follow. I wasn't. You made me want to dress better. You made me want to talk better. You made me want to be a lady. And that's the gift that we give to one another just by showing up and by loving one another day in, day out. Right? We don't shoot our wounded here. We do not shoot our wounded here. We care for one another. My very favorite priest, and the fact that I can say that at all is just hilarious to me. My very favorite priest, his name is Father Targonsky. We call him Father Ski. And he is a tiny little human. He's very short, but he's a bodybuilder. And he retired a couple of years ago from service to the United States Navy and the United States Marine Corps as a Catholic priest, as a chaplain. And all of that will become clear as to how it is I came into be in his company. But he was delivering a homily during Mass one Sunday, and he had just gotten back from holding a retreat for a bunch of Franciscan sisters. He had gone to Chicago, and he did a weekend-long retreat for them, and he came back, and so he was sharing some of his stories from his time with those Franciscan sisters. And one part of that, he said that he was standing waiting on an elevator, and he was waiting on the same elevator with this one particular sister, and she was 98 years old. And they were celebrating her 80 years as a Franciscan sister that particular weekend. And he said, so I sat down next to her while we were waiting on the elevator, and I said, "Sister, it is just amazing to me that you have been that faithful for 80 years. Oh my goodness." And he said, "She's not one to miss an opportunity to correct a priest." And so he said, she patted my knee and she said, "Oh, Father, you have it all wrong. It is he who has had faith in me for 80 years, not the other way around." And when he shared that, I thought, oh my goodness, is that not our truth? Oh my goodness, is that not our truth? I was born and raised in a really small town right outside of Akron, Ohio. The little town, its name is Rittman, R-I-T-T-M-A-N. It's a little tiny town of 5,000 people. In that little town, almost every single family came out of the hills of West Virginia once the coal mines started closing down, and they came over because there was an industrial revolution and you could get a really decent union factory job and you could live with an ounce of dignity and respect, which is not something that they were able to get out of the coal mining culture at the time. My family was one of those families that came straight out of the hills of West Virginia. My father was one of 9 kids. His father died before I was born. He died of cirrhosis of the liver, black lung, and throat cancer. Those are my people. And he was one of the founders of the Coal Miners Union. It was a very, very violent founding, right? I mean, my people are just scrappy and sick and drank their faces off. And by the time I came along, there had been generational alcoholism, right? Just generational alcoholism. And my father was absolutely no exception to that. Out of the 9 kids, 7 of them are alcoholic. I mean, it's just an absolute train wreck on that side of the family. So in that little tiny town of 5,000, when you have 9 adults and they have kids, I am essentially related to the majority of the town, right? And so you can't act badly for very long because you're going to get caught. That's just kind of the way that happens. And in my father's alcoholism, he had the rageful, violent kind of reaction to alcohol and to the reaction of not having alcohol in his system. Right? I think it's important for me on a daily basis to remember that alcoholism isn't just what I do during drunkenness, but it's how I feel and act when I am not under the influence of alcohol. Right? Because it's a problem that centers in my mind, not just my body. And so that's what I bring into Alcoholics Anonymous. And my father was under the lash of alcoholism every single waking moment and every breath that he took. And he was a very angry man. And still to this day, he is starting to get some dementia and some of those things, but he can recount to you, he has 2 resentments that go back literally 70 years. And he can recount with great detail the events that he's still angry about. Right? Now, if you compare the events that he shares with you today with how he told the story 20 years ago, it's gotten worse. Which is the way resentments go, right? Oh my gosh. So when I was a little kid growing up in that little tiny town where I was related to most people in a home with active alcoholism, and the active alcoholism was manifesting itself in through this very rageful man, I was terrified all the time. I was absolutely terrified all the time, and there was good reason to be scared, right? Because we often got hurt in that home. There are pictures of me when I'm a little girl, and I have my shoulders are pinned to my ears, and my little hands are balled up in fists, and my hair's up in ponytails, and I'm just ready, right? I'm just ready. Like, I wanted to control something in my life because there was nothing I could control because I was little and I was a kid and I'm powerless. Like, lack of power has always been my dilemma. Lack of power has always been my dilemma. The idea of a higher power is not foreign to me. The idea of a higher power has been part of my breathing since the day I was born. My father was my very first higher power. Right? The way he felt dictated the way I felt. The way he responded dictated what I could and could not do. The way he responded decided whether or not I was going to hurt that day or not. The idea of a higher power was not foreign to me, ladies. The idea of a higher power that loved me and could care for me was. I wanted to know what alcohol was. It's that simple. I knew that it was super important, right? It was really important to my dad that he drink a ton of it, and it was really important to my mom that he not have another drop. So that was that rub inside our home at all times. That was the rub. And my mom, oh my gosh, when she had a voice, which oftentimes she didn't, but when she would find it when she felt the need to follow him from room to room and nag him about his drinking, which wasn't helpful, right? But she was one of those, just the mobile nagger, and it never worked out well for us. I know some of you are well qualified for Al-Anon too, and you're probably also mobile naggers, right? There's a series of steps for that. Anyway, I just wanted to know what this alcohol stuff was. It was clear that it was super important, right? It was important in all kinds of ways. I didn't know that alcohol was the reason why my dad didn't love me, but I had an idea that it had something to do with it. And I was really sure that he didn't. And so one day I decided to go find out, because I would ask people around me, like, what is that stuff? Why is that stuff so important? What is that stuff? And all I was ever told is that stuff's for adults and you don't need to worry about it. And and I've always been a thinker. Right? Any other thinkers in the house? Oh yeah. I've always been a thinker. That's not good. It's not good when you have no skills and no positive frame of reference for life, because everything gets attached to the negative, right? But I'm a thinker, and I'm going to figure things out. I am. I'm going to figure them out. So if I ask you a question even today, don't just tell me what to do, tell me why. Right? I was a little challenging to sponsor. So they wouldn't tell me what that stuff was. They said, that stuff's for adults and you don't need to know anything about it. And I was like, well, the adults aren't doing a great job in my life right now, so I'm going to have to figure this out, because I'm going to have to control something. Right? If I want to quit hurting, I'm going to have to figure this out, because I'm going to need to make some decisions about what's going on in my life. And so I took a drink when I was 9 years old. I spent the night with one of my girlfriends. Her parents had a bar in their basement. That's traditional in Ohio. We have basements, and we spend lots of money to, I don't know, every now and then they get wet anyway, and so they ruin it, but you finish out the basement right into a bar or a man cave or something like that. The ladies from Cleveland know exactly what I'm talking about, right? And the quality of your basement, right? Like, that's whether or not you're affluent, whatever. I'm like, you can walk into the house to 1975, but go down in the basement, right? And that's where it's all happening. Anyway, we slept in the basement that night. Her parents had a bar. We started picking bottles off the bar, right? In her house, there was consumption of alcohol, but there wasn't alcoholism, right? They would have a couple of drinks. They would turn up the music. They would dance with their friends. They got lively and fun and told jokes and laughed and did all of that wonderful stuff. And it was such a lovely, right, convivial kind of environment. And it wasn't anything like when adults drank in my house. So I spent the night with her, and I talked her into drinking with me. She didn't see what the big deal was, right, because her family had a take it or leave it attitude toward alcohol. Mine did not. We started picking bottles off the bar based on their labels, and we'd take the cap off and see if we could get beyond the smell. And so there were some bottles we put the cap back on and put them back on the shelf, like, oh. And the first bottle that I picked out was Christian Brothers. I used to say it was Christian Brothers whiskey. I know, right? Like, how did I get past that smell? But I used to say it was Christian Brothers whiskey, and I was given a talk like this somewhere, and Sister Maurice, who was one of us, was sitting out in the audience. And out loud in the middle of my pitch, just like right now, she said, "Honey, that's brandy, not whiskey." I was like, well, leave it to the religious to know their booze. Anyway, I don't know how much I had to drink that night. I don't know how much I was able to actually get down and keep down, but what I know is that I felt the effect produced by alcohol that night, and I absolutely loved it. Because what it did for me was really simple. Did you hear that? It removed my fear. It removed my fear. My shoulders came down off my ears, and my little fist let loose, and I exhaled. And I didn't know that I needed relief from fear. I didn't know that I was walking around like this. I didn't know that I was living life on high alert. I didn't know that what I was experiencing was something different than what some of the other kids in my neighborhood were experiencing. I didn't know that there was another way to do it. But alcohol that night showed me that there was another way. And the next day I came to, and that was the night of first, right? It was my first drink, my first drunk, my first blackout. The next day was my first hangover. I mean, I just absolutely got it done. And I came to the next day, and even with all of that going on and how sick I felt and how confused I was about why I couldn't remember everything the way my girlfriend remembered things and all of that, what I remembered was, and I said, I'm going to drink as much of that stuff as often as I can. Period. I wanted to control something in my life, and I could control the way I felt because I had alcohol. Right? Now, I tried to control everything else, too. When I was a little kid, I had a posse. Right? I mean, nothing in that neighborhood happened without me having a say-so in it. Right? If we were I mean, we put together an annual sledding run because I lived on the side of a hill, and I lived in a little railroad town, too. And I don't know if you know anything about railroad towns, but in railroad towns, there's a right side of the tracks and a wrong side of the tracks, right? And so my parents, we lived on the first block on the right side of the tracks, which meant we were kind of on the wrong side of the tracks, but we were physically on the right side of the tracks. Right, but as you get farther and farther away from the train, like the houses get better and the neighborhoods get safer, right? But we were on the train tracks, right? And you just learn how to sleep through trains, you learn how to sleep through gunshots, you learn how to sleep through whatever it is your hood gives you, right? And that's what I had. And so, anyway, I would sit and my mom was always like, don't cross the tracks, do not ever cross the tracks. Those little houses over there, you do not ever cross the tracks. Well, you know what that does for an alcoholic. You know, like I would go up to the tracks and I would put my toe over, then I would take my toe out, my toe over, right? You couldn't wait to get across the tracks because clearly there was something cool going on over there, and if you told me I couldn't, it meant that I wanted to because, by God, I was going to control something, right? And so in my posse, I would send my posse over the tracks. We were doing recon over the tracks. We figured out what was available to us on the wrong side of the tracks, right? Most of my posse were good kids. They didn't want to cross the tracks. And I found out what was happening over there, and I didn't understand any of it because I was 10 and 11 years old, and I didn't have a frame of reference, thank God, for some of the stuff that was happening on those other side of the tracks. But I knew somehow, some way, that there were things that I might need over there one day. And by the time I was 15 years old and entering into my sophomore year in high school, I was drinking around the clock. I was unable to draw sober breath without going through a significant period of detox. I remember listening to my mom one day. She was having a conversation with someone on the phone. I think it was my aunt, and she said, I've really got to get Deb to the doctor. She's had the flu a lot lately. Because when I'm not drinking, my body requires alcohol, and so it goes through those changes, right? I was absolutely no stranger at all to significant and serious and debilitating withdrawal from time to time. It's just how I lived my life. And the way that I was able to increase the amount of alcohol I was drinking every single day so that I was sure that I would have enough, which there was never really enough, was that I learned where to go on the wrong side of the tracks, and I learned what that price was going to be, and I had to become okay with paying the price. Right? Because I'm 14, 15 years old. I don't have a job. I don't have any income. My family is poor. My parents are finally divorced. My mom's working 3 jobs just to try to keep the rent paid and some food in the cupboards. And I got nothing except what I got. And so the price just goes up and up and up and up, and my ability and my willingness to pay it increases with the price. Right? Because the more I need alcohol, the more I need alcohol, and the more I need alcohol, and that's just that. And so by the time I'm 15 years old and a sophomore in high school, I'm drinking the clock round. I'm living pretty much on the wrong side of the tracks. I'm just coming in long enough so that I'm making curfew and my mom's making eye contact with me. And I'm passing out, or I'm sneaking out in the middle of the night if there's a little bit left in the bottle that I didn't get to. And my life very, very quickly came to be about the consumption of alcohol because I was constantly chasing the freedom from fear. And by the time I'm 14 and 15 years old, I can't drink the fear away anymore. It's on me, and now I'm drunk, and I'm terrified, and I can't not drink, and I can't get relief from the fear. And I'm living over there, and I'm paying those prices. And I can't breathe. I can't breathe. And what finally happens for me is that I get caught, right? Tiny little town, you're not going to get away from that with that for very much longer. And so I finally get caught. My sister, now I have a sister. Her name is Diane. She's not quite 2 years older than I am. She and I looked identical when we were little. I was a little big for my age. She was a little small for her age. We were evening out pretty well. My mom used to dress us as twins. I don't know why that was, right? She doesn't have great fashion sense, so she'd find one outfit and she'd just buy 2 of them. She's still the gal who will mix patterns in her living room. Makes me crazy. Why do you really need an American flag thing on a flowered couch? But whatever. Just try to love her where she's at. And my sister was my person. I don't know if you had a person, but my sister was my person. She was my running buddy. She was my road dog. She was the one that I did everything with, right? If I was running a scam, she was point. I mean, She was my person. I drank, she did drugs. That way there was no conflict of interest in our house. Oh my God. And and we were a mess, right? We were just an absolute mess, and we were just tearing that town up. And the night that we got caught, we made an ill-fated plan. You know, it happens when you're drunk around the clock and you're planning, right? The plans just don't always work out so well. We had a couple of missteps, and by the end of the night, like I had drank myself into a drunken stupor within 2 hours of the night starting because I was unable to eat, and they brought me, instead of bringing me vodka, they brought me Jack Daniels, and instead of crossing the tracks to go to them, they came to us. And it was just one of those nights where nothing was on the rails in the first place, but it was certainly off the rails by the time the night was ending. And the cops were called, and the people from the wrong side of the tracks, there's a reason why they come to little railroad towns, and there's a reason why they live over there, and it's to get off the radar and stay off the radar, because they're living a lifestyle that doesn't fit with the larger society. And so there were warrants out for their arrest, and I was in trouble, and I was in a blackout, and I was sitting in all of my bodily fluids, and my sister, I don't know what she was on that night, but she took off running. My sister she was the one that would run all the time, so she was the one in and out of juvie jail, which served me really well because I never went to juvie jail. She did, so I could always point to her, right, when it was beneficial for me to get out of the hot seat, right? I'd be like, well, until But at the same time, she's my person. I mean, it's very complicated relationships when you're living in an alcoholic house. Right? It's real self-serving, but at the time, right, I'm just trying to take care of my people. Anyway, we get caught. It's a mess. The whole town finds out. I go to school on Monday. The guidance counselor's like, what in the world happened over the weekend, right? And so, I give her the sob story because I've already laid the foundation about how, my dad's the town drunk, and that we're not really safe in my house and all of that, which all of that stuff is true, right? And anyway, it's a mess, and I end up getting an appointment to go into downtown Cleveland into what then was Glen Bay Hospital on 150th and Puritas. It was where the hospital was, and I have to check into that hospital the Saturday after Thanksgiving in 1986. And I have to go in there because they want to put me through this. They had a 10-day inpatient assessment to see if alcohol might possibly be one of my problems. Now, I had thoroughly convinced them that alcohol was not the problem. The problem that I got caught and that I'm in such a big mess is because I don't drink that often, and so I don't know how to handle it, right? And so it was just a little bit of a misstep, right? It's not like I've been alcoholic for 5 years and I'm 15 years old. It's just that I don't do it very well, so I'm not very good at it. Anyway, so I still have to go in for this inpatient treatment program. It's the only way that I'm going to get out of this jam. And so I go and I do a little recon. I went to a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous. Somewhere along the line, I had heard that I was going to be forced to go to those things. So I went to a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous, right, to scope it out, just do a little recon. And I got ready to go to treatment. But what I also did is I drank. I went on a run, unlike any other run that I had been on. And because here was the deal, I didn't want to get sober. I didn't want to get sober. I had to sober up from time to time to keep an important appointment, right? Our book talks about that. And every single time I did, I hated it, right? I was in that space where I hated drinking the way I was drinking because of the stuff that was happening to me and the way I felt about it, right? I was so full of shame and remorse, I couldn't breathe, I couldn't look in the mirror. I hated drinking the way I was drinking. But if it was between that and feeling the way I felt stone cold sober, please just keep me drunk. I didn't want to be sober because I can't be sober and comfortable at the same time. And I am pretty well convinced that there is no getting out of the lifestyle that I'm living. There is no way of being delivered from the kind of guilt and remorse and shame that I'm living under right now. There's no deliverance from that, so why in the world would I want to be sober even for a minute and feel that way when I don't have to? But I got to go to this treatment center, and they're gonna not let me drink. I asked the question. If you have to ask whether or not they're going to let you drink when you're in a treatment for alcoholism, you might be alcoholic. I'm just saying. So I tried to drink myself to death. I mean, I absolutely went after it, and I was just like, you know what? I am exhausted. I'm exhausted, and I'm terrified all the time, drunk or not. And I'm done. I'm just done. Would you just let me be done? I'm not doing anything positive anyway. Just let me be done. And I did everything I could to drink myself to death, and basically I didn't have a car, I didn't have a gun, we didn't have a gas oven, right? I'm going through I just need to be done. And I kept coming to, and I kept coming to, and I kept coming to, and the last time I came to on Monday night, and I had checked into that treatment center on Saturday morning. And I was in the middle of full-blown withdrawal, and it was not easy or good. They had put me in a room with a set of pajamas where everything was bolted to the floor, and they just kept an eye on me to make sure I didn't die. It took me a full 10 days to physically stabilize so I could do things like sit upright and keep water down. And at the end of that 10 days, they had done all of my intake assessment stuff while I was in the middle of that blackout, so I had told them everything that I was doing, even though I had come up with an equation that might be somewhat, acceptable that would keep me from going into the 30-day inpatient program, but I came in a blackout and told them, the truth or some semblance thereof it. So before I even came out of the blackout, my little chart had, alcoholic stamped on the front of it, and off I was going to treatment. So I go downstairs, and the assessment thing is on a locked unit, and I go downstairs to start my 30-day inpatient program, and I am not okay. I am not okay. I am completely physically sober, and I am not okay. I got no God, I got no program, I got no relief, I got nothing except all of the shame, all of the remorse, all of the guilt, everything that I'm carrying around. My little shoulders are on my ears, my hands are balled up in fists. I am on high alert, and I am not okay. And now I'm in this place, and they lock the doors, and I have to stay here for another 30 freaking days. I am not okay. And I go downstairs, and because of the environment in which I was raised, I live life on high alert. I don't like big people. I don't like shadows. I don't like things that move too fast. I don't like loud noises that I'm not expecting. None of that. I walk downstairs into this treatment facility, and all of a sudden they call a code, and there's a siren going on, and big people are running, and they're loosening their ties, and they're going back to where I just came from, and I physically restrained a full-grown man, and I said, "What's going on?" And he said, "Your sister's here." It seems that I had gotten honest about what she'd been doing as well. They called my ma at home, and they go, "Yeah, you got another one." So my sister comes in to start her 10-day inpatient evaluation. We're pretty convinced that before they even met her, her little thing had drug addict stamped on the front of it. But they tricked her. They said, "Don't you want to go visit Deb?" And she's like, yeah, it's visiting day. I want to go visit Deb. And because why wouldn't she? Because she's my person. We never spent 10 days apart. Why would I ever spend 10 days without she's my person. And so she comes in to visit me, and the door closes behind her. It locks. They throw her own set of pajamas, and she tears the place apart. 10 days later, she comes down to start her 30-day inpatient treatment program, and I go running up to her, and she looked at me and she said, "Don't go to sleep." So I spent the last 20 days in that treatment center wide awake, or as close to it as I could possibly maintain. She was so mad. And in my family, holding a grudge, we don't call it having a resentment, we hold grudges, right? And it's a sport, right? We learn how to do that just like we learn how to play euchre and spades, right? You learn that when you're a little kid, so you get better at it and over time, right? And so I'm playing euchre, I'm playing spades, and I'm learning how to hold grudges. And we're really good at it. Right? There are grudges in my family that literally date back. I told you my dad has a resentment that's 70 years old, right? That's a grudge. It's not a resentment in my family. It's a grudge. And with a grudge, there are certain things that you're not allowed to do. You are not allowed to forgive them. Right? You don't forgive, because if you forgive, then you're letting them off the hook, and you're saying that it was okay that they screwed you over. Right? Because I didn't do anything at all to them. Right? It's all their fault, and I'm not letting them off the hook. So anyway, so my sister has a grudge, and I'm like, oh no, I'm never going to get her back ever. Right? Because it's the school, right? And we're good. And anyway, so I'm wide awake. I am doing everything I can in treatment just to get by. I'm not learning a thing. And I am not okay. I am stone cold sober. I don't have a solution. I don't have any relief. I'm not okay. And you know what they do to you in treatment? They talk to you. Nonstop. Nonstop. It's lectures, it's groups, it's this, it's that, and then they bring in other people from outside and they sit in little panels and then they talk some more, and I'm just like, shut up. God, people, you're killing me. Right? Just shit. And they're just on and on and on. And, and they kept me an extra few days in treatment because clearly I was a risk for relapse. Because I told them, shut up, stop talking. Right? Oh my God, like, what are you you think you're gonna deliver a spiritual experience to me? Come on. I get out of treatment because the money's done. Right? When the money dries up, you gotta go home. I get out of treatment. My sister catches me when I'm getting on the elevator, and she said, you do not relapse until I get out of here. I said, fine. She said, you go get your stuff, and you go see my people and get my stuff, and you wait. I said, fine. And I did. I don't know why, but I did. Right? Because my relationship with my person is on the line, and so I wait for 10 more freaking days, right? My sister finally gets home from that treatment center. I go snag her, drag her out of the car. Upstairs we go, lift up the floorboard. There's the stuff. I have random baggies full of random crap for her, and I have bottles for me, and I was like, tonight it's on. And she said, well, they called it a spiritual experience. And I'm like, who did what? And she said, well, I had a thing happen, and the counselor said I had a spiritual experience, and we're going to stay sober. I said, no, no, we're not. No. And she said, yes, we are. We're going to go to Alcoholics Anonymous. I said, Alcoholics Anonymous, you don't even drink. She said, well, they told me that NA sucks. I have to go to AA. And I said, I'm not going. And she said, if you don't, I'll tell. I know, low blow, right? Like, where is the love? So off we go to Alcoholics Anonymous. And you people were really happy to see us, too. Right? So here's how we did it. My ma dropped us off 15 minutes before the meeting was to start. We stood outside. We bummed cigarettes. I didn't smoke, but I learned. We chatted. We got phone numbers. We met the men who thought that adolescent newcomers were cute. I can still pick them out cold. It's not okay. And they have to come through me to get to my sponsees. Then we would go into the meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous late. We'd been there for 15 minutes, but we go in late. We walk through the center of the room. Almost all the meetings were in church basements with concrete floors and metal folding chairs. And if you drag them, they make a lot of noise. Right? And so we drag the chairs. I didn't even like coffee, but I had 3 cups at every meeting. Up, down, up, down, up, down, right? I was busy. And I got to know your tempo a little bit, and you people, you get ready to circle up, right? Getting ready to circle up and say that prayer that has all those words. Well, here's the deal. I wasn't raised in church. I wasn't raised praying. I got nothing, right? The only higher power I've ever known is my dad, not some loving God. I don't know how to pray. I'm not interested in praying. I don't even know why you people pray. If there was a God, he would have saved me a long time ago. Thank you very much. And if there is a God, I'm absolutely going to stay off his radar because of all of the stuff that I've already done. And so I'm not praying. I'm not learning how to pray. I'm not going to stand in your circle, and you're not going to pull my punk card like that. Thank you very much. So you people would circle up, and I would get out of there. Right? I would slide down the back wall. Now, the president of Alcoholics Anonymous, his name was Max Shadburn. Max Shadburn was well into his 70s, possibly early 80s, and he had been sober since Christ was a child. And the queen of Alcoholics Anonymous, I wasn't sure what kind of system you people had, but the queen of Alcoholics Anonymous, her name was Jane. Jane was 73 years old. She had been sober as long as Mac had. And she had a parking place out back, right? And nobody parked there but Jane. Somebody was driving Jane to the meeting. When she would get there, somebody would holler out. They'd say, "Jane's here." 4 newcomers would go grab this wooden high-back chair. They would carry it out to the car. They would set it beside. They would load her into it. Then they would pick it up and they would carry her down the stairs across the concrete floor, and they would set her right here in front of the podium where this lovely lady is sitting. She would get the only crystal ashtray in the whole place. The rest of us are using those metal jobbies that get bowed on the bottom when you're putting cigarettes out in them. And they would bring her a cup of coffee, and she smoked cigarettes on an extender. And she had this lovely white hair that she'd pull back in a bun on the little light bun. And people would line up to greet her. And she knew something about all of them, and it was this lovely exchange, and they would love her, and she would love them, and I was just like, oh. I never went anywhere near her. Why would I? Like I'm going to wait on the line to be rejected? Why would I do that? And Mac and Jane, they ran Alcoholics Anonymous, right? They were argumentative out loud during the meeting, right? Like if you misquoted something in the big book, Mac would stand up in the back and he'd be like, "That's bullshit." Right? And she would say, "Mac, sit down." And he'd be like, "Well, he said it was on 17. It's on 18 at the top." And Jane'd be like, "Well, who's got the damn book?" My people. And I'm going in late, and I'm leaving early, and I'm causing as much disruption as I can, and I'm slipping out of there one night just as you people were getting ready to circle up. I'm sliding down that back wall. I'm looking this way, sliding this way, and I ran into something. Mac had gotten up from his seat, and he had stood in the doorway like this. And he had these glasses that sat on the bottom of his nose like that. I don't know why he wore them. He never looked through them. And he looked at me and he said, "Are you alcoholic?" I looked at him and I gave him the only answer I had. And he reached into his pocket, he gave me a $5 bill and he said, "Here's $5, go find out. We are tired of you treating Alcoholics Anonymous like a joke." He said, "Can you control your drinking?" And he said, go try it. Go start to drink and try to stop. And if you can, I never want to see you again. And if you can't, you get back here. But you better be ready to do something different. And I went and I found my sister and I was like, "Go get your $5, we're out of here." I was so excited. Somebody with some authority was finally seeing things my way. I knew if I just redoubled my efforts, everything would be fine. I had been coming to Alcoholics Anonymous meetings at that point for a couple of months, right? I'd been sober. So I went into treatment the Saturday after Thanksgiving, and now it's the middle of March. And I'm still sober, and I'm still not okay, and I still don't have a solution, and I don't have a God, and I don't have the steps, and I don't have anything at all other than a new set of requirements that have been placed on me, right? I am absolutely certain that no member of Alcoholics Anonymous wants anything to do with me. I'm not going to take the risk, right? People did. They tried to approach me. They tried to bring me into the fold, and I just wasn't having it, right? I just wasn't ready. I wasn't done. I didn't know. There was no surrender in me whatsoever. There was no surrender in me. Right, and if you study the history of Alcoholics Anonymous, right, when Bill and Dr. Bob and the first several, were putting Alcoholics Anonymous together, when they would hit that really tough case, that person that just could not surrender, right, they would send them to Dr. Bob, because in Akron, Ohio, they're really good at extracting a surrender, and they do that with truth and love. with truth and love can bring a surrender out of an alcoholic out of a really hard case. And I was one of those cases and had no idea. I just had no idea. My sister and I, we went out and we relapsed that night. It was March 14th, 1987. And I had heard a little something, and I said, you know what, here's the deal. I have learned my lesson. I got it. I am never going to drink like that again, right? I got it. I'm not. I have learned my lesson. Like, it's time for the adults to stop overreacting, right? I'm just going to have a little something. I just got to get these shoulders off my ears. I just got to exhale a little bit. Man, you don't understand, right? I just need a little freedom from this fear that has me gripped and is holding my head underwater. I'm going to be fine. I'm just going to have a little something just to take the edge off. I'll be fine. I have learned my lesson. I'm not crossing the tracks. I'm not going over there. I'm not going to drink the whole bottle. I don't need to anymore. I got it. I had 3 shots and 2 beers. To me, that was very moderate drinking. 3 shots and 2 beers, and I drank them really fast because I needed the effect produced by alcohol. I needed it right then. And it came in and it settled down on me, and here was the deal. My shoulders came off my ears just a little bit, and my hands loosened just a little bit. But it wasn't quite what I needed, and so I had 1 more shot and 1 more beer and 1 more shot and 1 more beer and 1 more shot and 1 more beer. By the end of the night, I'm drinking out of the neck of the bottle. I cross the tracks. I come to the next day. I am filthy. I am black and blue. I hurt all over. I'm really sick. I walk into the bathroom. I look in the mirror for the first time in a couple of years. And what I heard was this: you will always drink just like this. And then I heard Max Shadburn's voice. If it doesn't work, you better get back here. March 15th, 1987, I walked back into a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous. I got there on time. I sat in the middle. I had 1 cup of coffee. When the meeting was over, I got in your stupid circle. Then I went to leave the room, and guess who was standing in the door? And he looked at me and he said, "Did you get a sponsor?" I said, I walked back into that room. I walked up to every woman in that room and I said, "Will you sponsor me?" And every woman went, "No, no." Oh, no, honey. And so I went to leave the room again, and Max said, "Well, did you get a sponsor?" And I said, "No one in here will sponsor me." And he said, "That's a lie." I said, "I'm not asking her." So I walked up front. I stood on the line. I got up to her, and I looked at her and I said, "Will you sponsor me?" And she took a drag off that cigarette extender. And she said, "Oh, honey, why should I?" And instead of telling her where to shove that cigarette extender, which was the only thing I brought to the party, that was it, I said, "Because I need to be sober and I don't know how." And I was like, "Who said that?" She said, "Well, I guess you'll be doing some things differently now, won't you?" And she gave me the list of everything I was going to do at a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous and everything I was not going to do at a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous. Oh my gosh. And so the next day I'm sitting there after school, I'm pretending like I'm doing my homework, right? Thinking about this, the fact that I've just turned my will and my life over to the care of 75-year-olds as I know them. And at 7 o'clock, this enormous car rolls in my driveway. I don't know how many of you ladies remember the Ford LTDs from the 70s. Right? They're urban land yachts. Like when you want to make a right-hand turn, you got to start a half a block back. Remember those? Right? And then the car will consider it as a request. right? And then it floats around, and when it stops, like there's too much car for the actual underbelly or something, because it'll do one of these numbers. One of those cars comes floating in my driveway, and my mom said, well, who's that? I said, I don't know, go find out. So I walk outside, and I'm like, and two old men are sitting in that car. They roll down the window, and I said, can I help you? And they said, Jane sent us, get in the car. And I said, no, I'm good. I went to a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous last night. I haven't had anything to drink. I'm good. And they said, Jane sent us, get in the car. And I was like, walked in the house and I said, Ma, AA's here? She said, okay, honey, have fun. And off we went to a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous. I'm sitting in the back seat of this Ford LTD. You could fit 12 newcomers in the back seat of a Ford LTD, I'm telling you. And we get to the meeting, and of course the meeting's not set up yet because, right, like their mission is to make sure I know how to set up a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous, right? Because getting the chairs just right, God help you if they're not just right, right? Have you ever had to sit through a business meeting because somebody put the chairs in a circle rather than a square? Right? These are important things in Alcoholics Anonymous. It's important to be trained early. And we sit through that meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous. It's the Barberton Monday night meeting. And in Barberton, Ohio, which is just, it touches Akron, there's a white hair row, right? Like all of the people with white hair come in and sit down this one wall. Right? And there, after you give a pitch like this, they open the floor for comment. I think you do it at some of your meetings in Cleveland too, so they open the floor for comment, right? Sometimes that goes well, sometimes not so much. And all the white hair people, they get to stand up and make comments about whether or not you did well, did not well, that kind of thing. Most of the time it's super lovely and loving, and people are just identifying, which is the very foundation of Alcoholics Anonymous, right? One alcoholic working with another alcoholic, right? That's why it's important that alcoholics go to Alcoholics Anonymous and people like my sister go to the right room, right? My sister spent some time going to the wrong room and she never made it to the right room, right? My sister finally, after 28 years, my sister finally entered the rooms of Al-Anon, right? She quit drinking, she quit drugging, but she never really got well, and she never healed from the childhood that she and I had both experienced together. She never healed. She didn't have a spiritual relationship. She had no connection. And her life has looked like it needed treatment that it wasn't getting. And finally, a couple of years ago, after praying for her for 28 years, she finally called me, and she was at her bottom, and she was sobbing, and she said, I want what you have. And I said, what do I have that you want? And she said, Deb, you're fearless. You walk into every room, you look everybody in the eye. She said, you say exactly what you want to say. You're not scared to talk to anybody or to ask for anything. She said, it's as if you think you belong everywhere. And I said, it's because I do. And she said, I'm just tired of being scared all the time. And her shoulders were on her ears and her hands were balled up in fists, and she was tired. And she's now a member of the Al-Anon family groups. And she's starting to stand up a little straight, and she started to look people in the eye. Anyway, after the Barberton Monday night meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous, we helped clean up the meeting, of course, because that's another process that you must learn as a newcomer. I get in the car. I'm pretty sure we got to turn right in order to take me home. They turn left. I was like, yeah, fellas, I think I live the other way. And they didn't even act like I was in the car. Right? And instead of taking me home, they took me to a donut shop. Right? Because in Northeast Ohio 30 years ago, after the meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous, you had to go to the freaking donut shop. And you know what you do at the donut shop? You rehash everything you just talked about at the meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous. Right? Only you do it with powdered donuts and really bad coffee, and you smoke as many cigarettes as you can possibly smoke, right? And by midnight, you go home and you get up the next day to go to school, and the next afternoon, guess what happens? 7 o'clock, there's another car in my driveway, different two old guys, right? Different old car, but they're there at 7 o'clock, and I go out and I'm like, seriously, man, it's been like 2 days in a row. I'm good. I swear to God, like, I'm good. And they said, get in the car. And what had happened was they had held an emergency group conscience meeting, and Mac had called it, and he said, we got to do something about these girls. They're ruining Alcoholics Anonymous. They're complete and utter disruption. They got to go. And they had everybody, almost everybody in the room was like, absolutely, they got to go, right? They were rallying against us because we were completely disruptive in every meeting we went to. And so they were running us out of Alcoholics Anonymous. And there was one man, his name was Bill Long, and Bill never talked, ever. Super old, back of the room, never talked. And the way it was relayed to me, Bill Long raises his hand. And thank God for our service structure and the fact that the minority voice gets to take the floor. And they called on Bill Long, and Bill Long says from the back of the room, he said, well, the way I see it is that God gave us these girls, therefore they're our responsibility, and we should do everything we can to put them onto the program of Alcoholics Anonymous first. And they said, well, who's going to sponsor them, right? They said, Mac, you can throw them out because that's in our book too, right? Go tell them to try to control their drinking, and if it doesn't work, whatever. And somebody said, well, what are we going to do if they come back? Who's going to sponsor them, right? And another guy in the meeting, he said, I have a feeling these girls are pretty badly damaged, and the only people that are going to have a shot at them are us old folks with white hair. And they all looked at Jane. And Jane said, I don't have the energy to sponsor those girls. And they said, Jane, you're going to have to take them, but if you do, we'll all help. I had a Monday crew, a Tuesday crew, a Wednesday crew, a Thursday crew, a Friday crew, a Saturday crew, and a Sunday crew. They had taken the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous. They had divided them up amongst themselves. I am a product of group sponsorship, right? I was tricked onto the program of Alcoholics Anonymous at donut shops around Northeast Ohio. And what they did, and when I say they tricked me onto the program of Alcoholics Anonymous, I couldn't be more clear about that, right? And they tricked me by being consistent, by being loving, by not asking me for money they knew I didn't have, by making sure that I always had a donut, and I always had a cup of coffee, and I always had a big book of Alcoholics Anonymous. And they would sit and they would talk about their experiences with the program of Alcoholics Anonymous. They would talk about their experiences of forgiveness. They would talk about their experience of feeling lighter, of being able to look people in the eye again. They would share with me how the promises had manifested themselves in their lives as a direct result of the work of Alcoholics Anonymous. Right? There was a man who was missing from our Sunday night group one night, and we were like, well, where is he? Well, I don't know. Anybody heard from, we didn't have cell phones, right? 30 years ago. Well, so he was just missing, right? And so everybody's worried about him, but what do we do when we worry about people? We talk about them, right? Right? We gossip about them just a little, right? We're just reporting. We're not talking about them. We're just reporting. And so we go to the donut shop to take a full report and account of the missing member, right? And when we're in the middle of the report, and I can tell that these old guys, for some reason, are really worried about this guy that wasn't there, right? And so the guy that's missing shows up at the donut shop, right? Because you know that if you miss the meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous, you know what donut shop you're going to afterwards, right? So the meeting, whatever, but the donut shop, that's where it happens. And so he walks into the donut shop, and these guys, these are blue-collar, out-of-the-hills, hard-working, strong-shouldered, lots of pride. Real men don't cry. Pull yourself up by your own bootstraps, right? And just get on with it. And if you want it, you just need to work harder. Those are these people, right? And he walks in and he is bawling. And we're all like, and we get him a chair and a donut and a cup of coffee and light a cigarette and hand it to him. And we're ready. He had just come from Sunday dinner at his daughter's house. He hadn't been to Sunday dinner in 16 years. He had just gotten to meet his grandchildren. And she said that if he had a good week, that she might let him take his grandson fishing next Saturday. The stories of restoration and forgiveness, that's how they tricked me onto the program of Alcoholics Anonymous. And some of these guys, they drank like my dad drank. They were angry like my dad was angry. They treated their children and their wives the way my dad treated us. They were, in essence, that same guy. And they would share their stories. And what I got to see was the emotion, now that they were sober, behind that, and the remorse, and the desire to make that right. And I started to understand the power and the depth of alcoholism and how it rots the soul. I used to go every now and then. They would take me to a meeting in Cleveland, Ohio. And when I would go to meetings in Cleveland, Ohio, the language was a little bit different. And you ladies, you taught me about the idea of being soul sick. Soul sick. I had never heard that before. But alcoholism, it rots us, right? And our souls are sick. And they showed me through sharing their stories what that meant and how it affected people and the reach of alcoholism and what it really does to us. And it was powerful. It was powerful. And these are the men, their kids wouldn't talk to them, but I would. And so they parented me and I allowed them. And they had my best interest at heart. And I learned about all of the best that Alcoholics Anonymous can bring out in people, and I fell in love with you. And when I was 2.5 years sober, it was time for me to leave the cradle and go to college, right? And they said, well, where are you going to college? I said, I'm not going to college. I'm going to stay right here. I'm going to get a job in one of the factories. Like, we got spades tournaments on Friday afternoons, right? Like, this is working for me. Why would I go anywhere else? And they said, bring us the paperwork to the donut shop today after school. And I was like, no, I'm good. And they're like, get the papers. Now, some of these guys had never graduated from high school, right, let alone been to college. But I take all these papers from my guidance counselor to the donut shop, and they were like, hand them over, right, because I'm like, I'm not filling them out, right? And so they were like, give them over, you know, and the guy's like, what's your last name? So they enrolled me in the pre-college test. They enrolled me in college. I wasn't allowed to go more than 2 hours away from home so that I would bring my laundry home so they'd keep an eye on me. And they kicked me out of the nest, and they taught me how to move in Alcoholics Anonymous. They taught me how to go and to get in a different home group. And they taught me that even though they had never experienced the bigness of Alcoholics Anonymous, except through the experience that they would have at Founders Day. Right? At Founders Day, which is AA's birthday party in Akron that happens every year. Why you have not been there, I do not know. But they would go to this gathering of alcoholics from all over the country, and sometimes from all over our country, and then others would come in as well, and they learned at that experience how big Alcoholics Anonymous was. And so they were not fearful for me to leave their nest because they knew that it was everywhere I was ever going to go. They gave me a foundation in Alcoholics Anonymous that is 100% unshakable. My life has had an extreme, incredible joy, and my life has had extreme and incredible sorrow in it. Ladies, life is life is life is life, right? But they gave me a set of tools to use to not only get through life, but to maximize the opportunities that I'm given at every turn if I choose to. Right? And they tricked me into a relationship with God, and it was really simple. I would take them all of these really big problems, because when you're 16, every problem is really big. And I would take them to the donut shop to these 70-year-old men who did not have any idea what to do with me. And I would share with them my problems, and they would tell me completely unrelated stories. Completely unrelated. There was one guy, like he was a broken record. He'd go, well, you know, a horse will always find its home barn. We were in the industrial northeast of Ohio. I don't know what they thought they knew about horses. but clearly that was some kind of spiritual wisdom. Right? I got to speak in South Dakota with some cowboys a little while ago, and they're like, well, you understand it now, right? Like, we can help you out with that now. It was actually pretty smart. But they would tell me these completely unrelated stories, and one guy, he was part of my God squad. He looked at me one day and he's like, did you pray about that? And it's like, that was his answer to everything. Did you pray about it? 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 And finally one day I looked at him and I said, I don't know how. And he said, give me your book. And I slid my book across the table and he opened it and he underlined and highlighted all of the tiny little one-line prayers that are throughout the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous. He slammed it shut, slid it back and said, pick one and try it. On your knees. So I went home that night, got on my knees next to my bed, opened the book and prayed with one eye open so that I could read it. And little by slow, I started to have a conversation. I started to have a conversation with my best friend. And when you have a best friend, what do you want to do? You want to talk to him all the time, right? You share with them all the cool stuff. And you take to them all of those really tough things that you need help with. And you listen to them when they have something to say. And I started to have a conversation with what would become my best friend. Right? And when the chips were down and when the big stuff happened, I had a relationship with God that I did not know was possible, that I did not know was available to me. I was pretty certain that I had done so much wrong that even with a large vat of forgiveness, even with all of that, there was no coming back from this, right? Being forgiven and being redeemed to me are two different things, right? And I don't want to argue definitions, right? But being redeemed, there's just no way that that's possible for me. And then I started the relationship with the power of God. And little by slow, through listening to their stories of being redeemed and their stories of being forgiven and their stories of getting the job back and the status in their family back and the relationships and all that, I started to believe, right? I came to believe that there was a power greater than myself that could not only restore me to sanity, but could also restore me to the position that He wanted me in all along. And they tricked me into the conversation, and the conversation just grew and grew and grew and grew. And here's what they did for me. If they were fishing, I was in the boat. If they were moving, I was hauling boxes. If they were baking cookies, I was covered in flour. If they were going to a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous, I was in the back seat. If they were going to an Alcoholics Anonymous convention, I was going with them, and I was just the one who had to sleep on the floor in the hotel room because they couldn't afford me. Right, but they never left me alone. They never left me to my own devices, and they would always put me in prime spot to pick up the spiritual message of Alcoholics Anonymous. And over the years, that relationship with God grew to where He really is now. God is my best friend. Right? At the end of the day, if all of you get a resentment and leave me, I am going to be okay. When I was 22 years sober, remember that surrender is a process, not an event. Right? The longer you're sober, the more you have to surrender. It's just fascinating. But you're never done. In my experience, you're never done. I don't know, one of the gals with 52 years can come up and say, well, I'm now done. And that would be really nice, because at least then I would know that it ends at some point. Right? But my 6th and 7th step are never done, right? And so, as my 6th and 7th step, as I continue to experience the awakenings that come from that 6th and 7th step process, I will always find new things that need to be surrendered. And I had surrendered things over and over and over and over, and I'm 22 years sober, and I finally got the right him, right? I mean, he's just, oh my gosh, he's everything. His name is Lee. He's a major in the Marine Corps. He's 6'1". He has a bald head, blue eyes. He treats me well. We golf together. We ride Harleys together. People follow him just because they can. Right? Because he's that guy who makes the right decision the right way all the time. He and I had joined the Catholic Church together. I actually got baptized, which was weird. Right? What do you mean? So I got baptized. I went through this process. I understood what I was doing. I signed up because somebody told me in the Catholic Church there's all of these spiritual tools that are available to you. Right? And so when when you need a little bit more, go get a little bit more. And so I wanted access to those spiritual tools, and that faith structure gave me access to those tools. And he came in and he joined with me, and we had everything in the right way, the right order, and all of that, and it was amazing, right? I got baptized, he and I joined the church together, then we got married in the church, and then he went away to war, and he came back, and he was changed, and he went away to war, and he came back, and he was changed, and I worked really hard while he was gone to connect with God in a way I had never connected with God before, because here's the deal. People were shooting at my husband on purpose, and I was not okay. I was not okay because for some reason I had come to believe that the human connection that I had with him was the most important thing I had in my life. And I was reminded upon his exit to go to war the very first time that is not the most important thing I have in my life. The most important thing I have in my life is the relationship that I have built with this loving God. And I must deepen my relationship with him in order to do this new work. Right? And so I learned how to live and practice living in the presence of God. Right? It was another spiritual tool that someone introduced me to in the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous, and I took the tool to the Catholics and said, how do I do this? And they said, we don't know, but we'll help you figure it out. And I deepened my relationship with God, and I stayed plugged in a meaningful way to the only source of power that matters. And I was able to experience peace while he was gone. And I was able to stay connected even when he was sending me the emails and said, honey, another IED today, nothing left but a boot. Because his men are dying and his heart is changing. And he comes home from war and he comes home from war. And every time he comes home, I'm like, God, I don't know how to do this. I don't know how to be a wife. I don't know how to bring him back from war. I'm like, I am yours. Just work through me. Just work through me. Elizabeth gave me this. Right? From you, through me, to him, please. Just flow. Because I got nothing without you. And I learned how to deepen that relationship and how to stay plugged in through what felt like was the biggest challenge of my entire life. And he comes home, and he finally comes all the way home, and we go through this healing process. Right? And I go home from work one day, and I'm working for the United States Marine Corps. I'm working for the same general who runs the base where he's stationed. I get home from work. He doesn't get home from work. I call around. He got killed on his way home from base that night. And I can tell you, I'm standing in my kitchen, and I get that news, and I can't breathe. And because I have lived in this spiritual process of the program of Alcoholics Anonymous, a prayer begins in me. I do not start to pray. A prayer begins in me because I struck a deal with God in the third step. That if I turn everything over to you, you will care for me. And God knew in that moment that the one thing I needed most was to be meaningfully connected to him. And so the prayer began in me. I did not start it. And what God told me, he whispered in my ear. He said, I'm here. I'm here. And I had been practicing living in the presence of God, and he is this great golden light that is shaped like a human with no other features. And he comes and he wraps himself around me from behind like a lover wraps up their beloved. And I know that I'm going to be okay. And you come. And you come. And when I was sober about a year and a half, Max Shadburn died. He and Jane were dying of lung cancer. That's why Jane was carried into the church. She couldn't do the steps. That's why they were carrying her, and that's why she didn't have the energy to sponsor us. She was dying of lung cancer, but she took us on anyway. Anyway, I was sober a year and a half, and Mac died. And I was just pacing around like, oh my God, what am I going to do? Like I still didn't like him. But now he's gone, right? And he's my person, weirdly. And so they were like, well, go over to his house and ask the widow if there's something you can do for her. And so I go and I knock on the door, and his widow answers, and I said, I'm with Alcoholics Anonymous. Mac was one of my people. Can I help you? And she said, well, honey, what can you do? I'm like, it's important to have a skill when you show up to these things. Like be a pain in the ass. That's not really a skill that you take to these things. And I looked at her, and because of spending day upon day upon day upon day in meetings of Alcoholics Anonymous, setting up the meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous, I looked at her and I said, I can make coffee. And she said, well, come on in then. She said, people are coming. If you'll keep that coffee fresh, that would be a great, great help to us. And I said, yes, ma'am. And my husband's gone for about 24 hours, and I'm laying in my room just kind of staring at things, and my house is full of people, and you guys came, and the Marines came, and that was a really interesting... And then the Catholics came. Oh, the tapestry of my life is awesome. And I'm laying there, and all of a sudden all the voices are gone, and I was like, oh, I think I can sneak out of my room. Everybody might be gone, right? Because I get exhausted when I'm covered up with humans, right? And sometimes. And I'm an extrovert, but not that much of one. And anyway, and so I get up and I walk out of my bedroom, and so nobody else is around, which is weird. And there's a woman who's pacing outside my kitchen, walking back and forth across the screen door. And I went up to the screen and I said, can I help you? And she told me her name, and she said, my sponsor sent me over here. And I said, okay, for what? And she said, I'm supposed to be helpful. And I had that moment where I went back to when I was 17 years old, and I looked at her and I said, well, honey, what can you do? And she said, I can make coffee. And I said, there are a lot of people who are coming and going. If you can just stand in this kitchen and keep that coffee fresh, that'd be really great. Ladies, the life that I live today is the life that I was meant to live. The life that I live today is one that I deserve. Not because of who I am in my human experience, but because of the fact that I am spiritual first. I am a child of God, as are you. If I am not everything that I am today, then God does not have all of the venues that I walk into where He can do His work through me. Several years ago, I'll just wrap up. Several years ago, I had gotten promoted, and so my office was now in the Pentagon. And so I'm standing in the Pentagon on a Monday morning looking up at it, and I was like, oh my goodness. How does a girl like me get to a place like this, right? And I walk in there and I get my desk and my assignment and all that kind of stuff, and my boss, and so I'm walking around. He's like, come and walk with me. I'm going to give you a tour. And he walks me down into the 4th corridor, which is the corridor where the plane struck the building on 9/11. And at the point of impact, the workers who were rebuilding the Pentagon, they dug into their own personal pockets and they built a chapel there with stained glass and everything. And it's a little tiny chapel. And in the Pentagon, they have daily mass at 11:30. And around the corner from that, down this little hallway, if you don't know what's there, you wouldn't know to go there. He takes me into this little room. And I walk in, and it's the room of remembrance. And there's one of those wall fountains, right? It's like a marble wall, and the fountain that's coming over it. And in that marble is etched the name of everyone who died in the Pentagon that day. And there's one single bench in the middle of that room. And it's the place that you go and sit if for a moment you forget why your office is in the Pentagon. And I'm in there and I'm standing with this guy that I don't know very well, obviously. And I'm just looking around, and he said, I brought you here to remind you of why we do what we do, and of who you work for and why. And I said, sir, I work for God. And he said, but you do it through the United States Marine Corps. I said, oorah! Don't for a moment think that your ability to stand up straight, to walk down the street and not have the need to cross it no matter who's walking toward you, that your ability to look at someone in the eye for your ability to show up and be better today than you have ever been. Don't think for a moment that you're doing that for you. People like me need to watch you do that. Because by watching you, I raise my own standards. Because when God flows through you, you connect to me. Why do I need an inventory process? Because I need to stay in right relationship with you so that I can experience Him and so that you can experience Him differently when He flows through me back to you. We are connected. I'm out of time. I love all of you. Thank you so much for having me this weekend.